Lovely. Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to Eventcombo's global HR event, a much needed one in the current environment landscape, employee moonlighting, the big debate. I'm Shanti Sharma and I'll be moderating the event today. I'm a learning and organizational development professional with over 26 years of work experience. Brilliant panel. To start with, Jeanette. She calls herself the employer's lawyer, and I love that phrase. She helps employees maximize relationships with their most valuable assets, their employees, and proactively and creatively addresses workforce concerns and minimizes lawsuits. Next up, we have Rajiv. Hey, Rajiv. Rajiv is an accomplished professional with over 26 years of rich transformational and change management experience. He has uniquely shaped his career by successfully building on business experience and then moving on to lead the HR function. Hey, Arthur. Arthur brings
Hi everyone.
solid experience with capability across both startup and large scale enterprise software and technology environments. Currently, he is heading up AIS vertical at Tarabut Gateway, I hope I pronounced it correctly, in the Middle East and North Africa region. A very warm welcome to all the panelists, and it's a pleasure to have you here today. I'm sure our audience is going to greatly benefit from all the valuable insights, perspective, views that you bring to the table. Employee moonlighting is sparking heated debates across organizations. Several giants, tech giants specifically, have warned of strict action against moonlighters, while some of them have resorted to mass layoffs. However, in an era of gig economy, many professionals do not see this practice as unethical. In fact, some believe that this is the future trend that all corporates might need to get used to. A recent study revealed that 50% of the employees have moonlighted and an additional 25% are considering it. That's nearly 75% of the employees thinking about freelancing opportunities. The world surely is divided in this opinion. Let's first start with Rajiv. Rajiv, what do you have to say about this?
I would like to talk from three different perspectives. One is from an employee perspective, second from an employer perspective, and lastly from the society perspective. If I were to give, and I'm speaking from Hyderabad, India, and if I were to give a context to the Indian scenario, then to me, moonlighting has been existing for quite a long period of time, right? It's not a new subject, to be open with. It's only that it has come to some significant discussion levels today, as now corporates or large giant organizations are realizing that this can lead to potential problems in future for them, and hence they have started taking this on a priority basis. For example, if I talk about education sector in India, right, most of the teachers who are teaching also do private tuitions in the post school hours, and that has been a practice, going in India for a quite significant period of time. Now this, one can say, is a direct conflict, between what they're doing in their day job for which they're getting paid, but at the same time in the evening hours, they are taking. Some view that, okay, they are not taking, if they don't take for their own school children, then it is okay, but if they take for their own school children and their own class students, then it is unfair. But that's where the debate lies. But since the demand of teachers is there, the organizations have continued to allow this practice, and this is going on. Similarly, from a global perspective, if I were to give an example, then large multi-level marketing companies have come into existence, and they have also come into India. And I would not name the company. I'm sure most of us know which company or the companies that I'm referring to. A lot of people engage in multi-level marketing apart from their own work, what they're doing. So there is some kind of referral system where you enroll and then you keep enrolling a lot of people and then you keep promoting the products, and on consumption of the products and addition of new members, you start getting certain remuneration. So this is the typical multi-level marketing model which is going on. So the employees, have been doing this also. However, the scale was limited. Now the scale suddenly increased because of COVID. In COVID, what we observed, that a lot of companies had to go through tough times. And if I was earning, let's say, $100, my income suddenly came down to $50, and now that became a challenge for me. And how do I survive? So in order to gain that, come back to what I was earning earlier, people have started thinking a different way, and trying to see how to supplement their income. In which case, they have started now doing moonlighting, right? And this is where the beginning of the employee, mindset came in, where employee then started seeing that I cannot come down on my lifestyle and I cannot come down on my living, and therefore I need to earn more, right? Now this was initially very easy, but later on, when you taste, like they say, when the lion tastes the blood, then they start really enjoying it. So the same way, when human beings started getting that extra buck and extra dollar, then they started enjoying it, and they said yes, why not, and nobody is, they believe that nobody is going to watch them, nobody is checking on them, nobody is questioning them. So they've started feeling that this is the moral right, and what I'm doing is right. And the consciousness mirror got shifted over here, and that is where, the challenge came in, because they could not differentiate between what was appropriate for them to do and what is not legal, for them to do, because sometimes you may end up, hurting your own organization, sharing some information, which should not be shared, with others. The second is, from an organization perspective, what I feel is moonlighting is primarily because of lack of employee engagement and gainful employment. Had the employees been fully engaged, then they would not have time to breathe somewhere else, right? Since organizations are bloated and they are having extra reserves with them, and the jobs are less, and so what do we do? An idle mind is devil's workshop. So people then start, gainfully utilizing themselves in some other areas, and that's where organizations have been perpetrators of moonlighting by themselves. Second, what I believe is a strong Indian word, which is, probably known to many, is called as karma, Karma. Where we say that whatever we do in life, comes back to us. So when organizations started adding more and more people, obviously the cost went up, and therefore the price went up, and therefore the consumers had to pay. Now, who are these consumers? At the end of the day, these are the same employees who are the consumers, right? So when you're overpricing on one side, and then employees earning from the other resources, what you're seeing over here is an extraordinary inflation which is happening. So karma is hitting back the organizations. Had the organization looked at the employee workforce management in a more meticulous way and identified really how many are required, that way they would have managed more gainful employment. Because when you have more people and less work, this is what happens, right? And lastly, what I want to say short is, in terms of society, this is something which is very, very, watchful. We have to be very careful, because initially we are assuming things as society that this is okay, and after a certain period of time, when that has become a habit, we start having problems, you know and that becomes a challenge of how do we deal with it. Then, there are several examples, like for example, if you're living in a gated community, you will find that initially you will allow a lot of pet loving people, and I'm also a pet lover, I love pets, right? But when you start allowing a lot of pets, you will start seeing that initially everybody will allow, and slowly then you see the fights coming on, the differences keep coming on, right? And that becomes a challenge to handle. But had you prescribed it at the beginning, that proactively, that this is what you should be doing, everybody will come in line. And that is where I personally feel that human resources as a function has largely been reactive to this whole moonlighting approach. Had they been proactive, we would have definitely found better solutions than sacking people or mass layoffs and all that we're doing.
People have been moonlighting since ages. It has become more obvious now with COVID. And I think you brought it a wonderful point around the dilemma that everyone is facing. Is it ethical or not ethical at this moment? With that dilemma, I will move ahead in our conversation and invite Jeanette to share her views.
I certainly agree with what Rajiv has said. Um, I guess going to be, I'm in the United States, and I like to quote my son. He says, "We're a country that's founded on the principle of don't tell me what to do," and that very much plays a part here. The whole thing with somebody, an employee who may be saying, "Listen, if it's during the time that I'm not working, what's it to you?" So the question, is it ethical? Is it ethical to moonlight? So I tell people, lawyers' stock answer number one, it depends. It's great. People love hearing that, by the way. So it depends on what. everything, when you answer these questions, it's so fact sensitive. So now there could be some situations in which it is unethical. If what the person is doing is a direct conflict of interest with their primary job, that's one thing. But some of that can be addressed without forbidding moonlighting across the board. If you're worried about confidentiality, then there are things known as non-disclosure agreements. If you're worried about somebody, if it's a conflict because it's a direct competitor, then there are provisions known as restrictive covenants, non-competes. There is under the common law, a duty of loyalty. That's something else. Or if it is somehow inhibiting someone's performance at their primary job. If it's not doing that, there's a general principle that, if it's after hours and it's legal activity, is there really much you can do? Now, even if we get to that, let's assume for the sake of argument that you can prohibit an employee from moonlighting. Then we get into a situation of, do we have an example of the principle of just because you can doesn't mean you should? You may actually, in the long run, be bringing more problems on yourself, legal and otherwise, because here's something I generally urge my clients and prospective clients to look beyond the immediate situation now and say, all right, you want to forbid your employees from moonlighting. Why? What are you hoping to gain? And what do you want big picture from your workforce? If you want them to go above and beyond their obligations, their minimal obligations, and you also want them to be strictly compliant with their obligations, you have to set the example. What are you doing? And if you are not being compliant with your obligations, and I don't just mean with respect to moonlighting, I mean everything, your obligations, legal and otherwise, to your employees are also going to look for reasons to find you less than compliant. And if you discipline an employee for something like this, they may turn around and say, hey, wait a minute, you're not in compliance with wage and hour laws and you owe me overtime pay. Or, you know what, I think this activity that you're involved in violates anti-discrimination laws. So you actually could be bringing on a lot of issues and opening up a certain can of worms that you didn't expect. So what I tell any employer with respect to any policy with their employee is, all right, first of all, is it required to have the policy? Is there a legal reason? And beyond the minimal legal reason, why? Why do you want to do it? What do you hope to gain? What are you hoping to protect? And is the measure that you're contemplating, is that not just necessary, is it the least restrictive way to do that? And if it isn't, then maybe you want to dial that back, because your employees, you need them. Let's face it, yes, your employees need work. But if you have employees, you need them to run your business. And you can decide, you set the tone of your relationship with your employees. So if you go in with the attitude that they're your biggest liability and that you better have a tight rein on them, the work culture that you're going to create there, in this day and age particularly, can very much backfire. I don't know what's happening where all of you are located, but certainly here there's been a big resurgence now with labor unions. And I think, Rajiv, to your point, talking about employee engagement, if employees do not feel seen or heard, then they're going to look for a way to be seen and heard. So that's that. And Rajiv also talked about compensation for employees. So you may also want to look at, if you don't want employees moonlighting, maybe you need to look at, why are they moonlighting? If it's about money, then maybe you need to be looking at your compensation practices. You can't set things up in such a way. Look at the situation. What if it were reversed? What if you were the employee? What would you do if you were getting that salary that employee is getting, or those wages? What would you do if you were being subjected to certain requirements? How would you respond? And if you would respond similarly, then can you fault the employee for doing that themselves? We really, at this point, I think, have to look at it differently. It used to be you were the boss, You do what you want. If you don't like it, you don't have to work for me. And that attitude just doesn't really play well now. And many lawsuits, by the way, happen because really in what employees are saying. At the end of the day, there's a legal argument, but behind it is, hey, you hurt my feelings. Hey, I don't feel valued.
Both the employee and the employer have to now create where that boundary lies. Um, I mean, anybody who pushes the boundary beyond a certain limit, the boundary is going to crack and break up, and there'll be lots of unrest. I mean, this is the first time I've heard about, not only beyond legal, there could be so many other problems. So thanks for throwing light on that.
Yeah, if I
Um,
could just throw in one other quick point, because
sure.
you said, when you said boundary, I realized I didn't say this, which is, you know what, at the end of the day, whether you like it or not, human beings are interacting. It's a relationship. And the question is, do you value your relationships? They're your employees. I understand at the end of the day, you're in charge and you have to set boundaries. But the question is, if there are too many boundaries and they're too rigid,
Hmm.
then you're going to deal with the consequences of that. And it's as in any relationship, whether you're talking parent-child, whether you're talking about
Yeah.
spouses or anything else. So that doesn't mean that you let your employees run roughshod all over you, walk all over you. No, you don't have to do that. Nobody is advocating that. I'm not advocating that. But if you're going to have boundaries and you're going to have certain prohibitions, at least be thoughtful about what they are and how broad and how stringent do they need to be. And what are you also willing to do to protect those boundaries? Make the steps reasonable. Okay, now be quiet.
Yeah. No worries, Janet. I think that's very valuable input. Thank you so much. Arthur, what is your perspective? What do you want to add before I get to the audience questions?
I think it's really good that it's been summarized. One of the key things that both panelists have addressed is ultimately, whether it's employer or employee, the most important thing is culture. And this is where, as a business being successful, you have to establish a good cohesive unit so that you could deliver, value. Yeah, I know it's like what Janet said, it is about profit, but you can deliver value to your customers as a whole together. You're not there to trying to cheapen someone or basically, overwork someone. You're trying to understand how both parties can work towards together to a common goal, and therefore both get rewarded. Now, my opinion, coming both from a corporate side and also from a startup side, I've been an employee and an employer. I think one of the key things is, first thing first, moonlighting has, like Rajiv said, it's been done ages ago, but I definitely think there's a negative connotation that is associated to it, when in fact there's other terminologies of, working two jobs, being like a gig economy, working on the side. So as a result, one of the things you need to think about is, and I think Janet covered it, is the work that you're doing. What is the impact if you were to split your concentration? This is coming from an employee's perspective, right? If I'm doing something that is my hobby, for example, let's say I decide to take up carpentry, right? This is still providing me value as another stream of revenue or as a hobby, but it has nothing to do with my sort of main piece of work. And as a result, if I have the bandwidth, then what's wrong in that? However, if you are doing something that, for an example, is within the same industry, has negative connotations to the company that you're working for, then of course this not only would lead to a lot of legal issues, it leads to a sort of moral issue. Why are you sort of doing that? Is it just because something? Let's say there's a bad culture, a bad boss, doesn't mean you should also be doing something bad at the same time. So what is the problem that you're doing? And I think one of the interesting things I'll bring up is, it's interesting that I personally think, and this is sort of what I've seen in the industry, is I've seen more people in corporate moonlighting than people in startups. The reason is because within a startup, like Rajiv's talked about, it's quite a lean environment. You're there sort of go, go, go. Yeah, everyone works hard, but sort of all the concentration, all the energy is poured into that startup. And as a result, I think everyone's addressed that. There's a sense of belonging and there's a sense of unity whereby, I'm putting my effort into this. Therefore, why do I need to moonlight? Because this thing requires my attention. Whereas in a corporate environment, it's likely that you have a larger team where things are more siloed. As a result, you've got more free time. Now, I'm not saying both sides don't have, both sides works in a different way. And even in a startup, there are times that we split, allowing employees to essentially have sort of self-learning time, which yes could sort of drag into into sort of moonlighting area. However, if it doesn't impact and it allows, because ultimately one thing I really enjoyed as part of being a startup is I've seen other people actively supporting other people's moonlighting, which is their side gig, their side business, right? Because that's the whole point. You want to see everyone grow, and ultimately, I've seen cases where people have left happily because their side hustle has improved, and as a result, good on them. I've also seen a drastic example, in a good sense, where some of their side hustle was within the same industry, but it became so good that the two companies, in a sense, were like, why don't we merge together or combine the both assets, which was beneficial to both parties. What's wrong with moonlighting is the opinion that you feel like you're doing this behind someone's back and therefore affecting the performance of both the employee or the employer's performance itself. Another thing I'd also like to add is, because not only is it COVID that has caused an increasing amount of people who are working more than one job, let's say, so I can stop calling it moonlighting in a sense, is even for myself, I work across, in terms of my team, I work across country. Some people are based in Bangalore, some people are based in Dubai, some are in London, some are in US. So it's all across the world as a result. So the concept from an HR perspective of 9 to 5 or within my working hours is sort of thrown out the window. And even during COVID, I'm sure people are saying there's 2 peaks of working hours or 2 peaks of productivity across the day. Now there's 3, right? Because people could then either take the kids to school, and then as a result, the peaks sort of shifted, but then they also work a little bit after dinner. So rather than sort of hour driven, like time slots, it could be more performance driven. And because I'm, for example, I'm going to probably be working later tonight because of, people from the States waking up. As a result, I can have a little bit of free time now. So it's there's so much flexibility, which sort of falls into where Janet's view. It depends, because you can do that. You have the freedom to do that as long neither party are affecting each other, and you have that honest, open channel to communicate what you want to do. And sort of that is my point of view, I guess, and open to questions.
Thanks, Arthur. I think it's a lovely perspective in terms of not just COVID, but also the fact that the way all of us are working in the full-time jobs itself is changing now. Since you said, Arthur, that you've been both an employee and an employee, maybe the first question I'll throw it at you. What are some ways in which companies can track moonlighting?
I don't think you should come from the standpoint of how should you track moonlighting, right? Because the key point is, how are you tracking your overall performance? And as I think both startups and corporate are working towards these sort of KPI metrics, right? Key performance indexes. What are your objective? What is your key result? If the company, and as a result the individual, has achieved their objective and the key result, what's wrong with it? I think another way to rephrase it is, how should a company be aware of the number of people working outside, like having outside separate interests as a result, by shifting I suppose the standpoint.
Janet, Rajiv, anything you want to add to this question before I pose the next question?
I think I would say that most employers who are worried about that, you need a little bit of a paradigm shift. Meaning, instead of saying, how do I track this? It's, I also get these questions if somebody's worried about employees who misuse the internet. And if and I would say, well, all right, treat it as a productivity issue and look at that, a productivity and performance issue. If you don't see those indicators, then is it really a problem? Is that really where you want to allocate your time and resources? And again, is that really the type of relationship you want to have with your employees? And also, I think what Arthur said, with respect to even saying, hey, what kinds of other things do you work on, or are you interested in? What if you actually took a few minutes? You don't have to be buddy with your employees. And I'm not saying that you should invite them to, your children's birthday parties. And I'm not saying you should be totally in each other's personal business, but taking somewhat of an interest in your employees and understand, hey, these really are real people that are working for you. And, again, having them feel seen and heard, you can get an idea from them if that's an employee that you need to be concerned about or not.
I mean, thank you, Shanti. And I completely agree with what Arthur and Janet have told. And I think the word tracking, when it has come to our mind, we need to self-reflect. When does the word tracking come to our mind? Okay, so tracking will come if you're having some doubt. If you're having trust, you will believe that things will happen. But if there is a need for tracking, means you're suspecting that something can go wrong here and there for you. Generally, what I'm not saying is that we should not track, but what I'm saying is it should not be a cat and mouse game. No. So moonlighting, unfortunately, is building more of a negative context. So it is not a cat and mouse kind of tracking that I want to do. And I love the way Arthur put it, that the manager conversations have to become richer, and they have to be more productivity based discussions. And also, what Janet mentioned earlier, is it more in terms of how much engaged are we with the person, in terms of really knowing few more things about the person than just about the work that we want to discuss with them. From a tool perspective, there are n number of methods that we can do. A proactive method, according to me, would be utilizing the employee engagement survey. You know, and can we include proactively certain questions built into it? Framing that, would you like to do something in an area which excites you, which can add value to the organization and to you? You know, and open that thought up. Saying that management is open to listen to you, and you can share something that can result in a collaborative working or co-creating something for us within the organization. And also, we as an organization having a large heart and allowing you to pursue some of your own things also, without it really conflicting with the organizational goals and vision. So those are my thoughts, please.
What role should HR managers play in terms of understanding and actioning on employee moonlighting?
I mean, I personally believe, though I have been in HR for so many years now, I still personally believe that HR is still more on the reactive side, has still not been on the proactive side. They still like to follow what management decides and then align the function according to what management is proposing. Whereas, we have been talking for past decade or so that HR should be on the CXO table and should be partnering with the business head and co-creating the entire HR strategy, right? And this is where I feel the gap. So when things have gone wrong, you start wondering, oh, what kind of policy should I put in place? What kind of documentation should I come up with? What kind of tracking mechanism or test that I can put on place? But these are all afterthoughts. Tomorrow there's something else could happen. Whereas if we would have participated in the performance discussion with the management and understood that, look, there are certain departments which are excelling, there are certain departments which are not meeting the performance standards, which means there is some problem there. And if HR plays a proactive role with the manager to deep dive, we would have discovered not only moonlighting, but we'll discover many other issues also, and thereby proactively work on them. One of the famous issues that all the organization and HR faces is loss in productivity, and then we put in performance improvement plan, and 3 months, 6 months, and then you ask them to go. But this is so sad. Why did it even reach to that point? Because when we are recruiting somebody, when we are bringing somebody, we are bringing them with knowing that they will add value to us, and we are giving them all the opportunity to add value. Then what happened suddenly within a year, 2 year, or 3 years? So which means that we should flip the coin, and mostly the HR department, and they need to sit not in their departments but sit with the line managers and listen carefully to what's happening. Listen to the employee voices, see what is happening, and then decide on the policies and processes. Policy process must be an outcome and not an input document for organization to structure. These are my thoughts.
If I can
Yes,
jump on
please.
that. You know what? This actually gets to an even bigger issue, in my opinion. And I believe that overall, HR gets a bit of a bad rap, a bit of a bad reputation. And I don't believe all of that is deserved. And I think that that really stems from a lack of understanding of the value of HR. I think that you have executives and business owners that see HR as frankly, as a necessary evil. And so I fully agree, HR should have a seat at that table. I don't believe that it's HR's fault that it doesn't. I think that it's because you have the business owners and the executives that, that lack of trust that I think Rajiv also alluded to is there. And so I think it's also there's a perception, I think, that HR doesn't understand business, and so they don't want to take HR seriously. So there's a gap between HR and the leadership team. There's also a gap between HR and the rest of the employees who think that HR is the corporate henchman. So HR is really getting it from both sides. Now, I agree on what role I think Rajiv and I are in agreement on what role HR should have. So we then get to the question, which I don't think we're going to be able to begin to answer today, is how to get HR to that point, how to bridge really both gaps. And I think so, whether it's moonlighting or whether it's any other performance issues, whether it's employee relations issues, HR, by and large, by most companies, I don't think is being utilized the way it should be utilized. There's a lack of understanding there, and there needs to be some way of educating businesses as to the value of HR, how HR can properly be used. And then issues like this, I'm not going to say they're never going to happen. People are going to moonlight. There may be fewer people, there may be more people. And again, it's going to depend on the specific circumstances. But it really, whatever's going to happen in the company, the bottom line is that it's going to be the leadership team that is going to set that tone. And if the leadership team wants a certain work culture, they want engaged employees, they want a certain behavior or commitment from their employees, that commitment, the leadership team has to really embrace that and practice that itself. And then the rest can flow.
And Janet, a very related question is there in the text chat. Is there a need to determine and design a certain policy for employee moonlighting? If yes, how far can it be valuable? If you can just talk about it in a brief moment, I'll move to the next kind of questions then.
So the question really, again, depends on your company. There may be some jobs for which you really need an anti-moonlighting policy. There may be some businesses where you do. And then I still think before you start with a policy, which I think Rajiv kind of alluded to, is kind of reactive, or at least to do it because you see a problem like this. What about stepping back and looking at, okay, who is moonlighting? Is it people in a particular position, people within a certain pay bracket, so to speak? You know, is it people who have families? Is it? And let's look at why. And if I'm looking to stop this moonlighting, why? What am I concerned about? Is this the best way to address that concern? Because otherwise you're just kind of putting a policy in there, and at best it's a Band-Aid. It's kind of, okay, I'm going to react. And again, without thinking about what might be the consequences of what this policy is going to do. You know, my actions or whatever, again, the atmosphere that I'm going to create. And particularly if I want a situation where I want my employees to come to me, I want them to trust me. I don't want to be sued. I don't want lawsuits. I don't want charges with government agencies. I don't want audits. You're not going to prevent those entirely, but still, that's, you can call me up and I can say, sure, I can write you a policy, but if I want the policy to be effective, it's not enough to have it. You got to apply it. You also have to be consistent in how you apply it. So you can't just apply it selectively. At least in the United States, if you do that, you can open yourself up to discrimination allegations. Oh, I'm in this class of people that's protected under the laws, and you applied it to me, but someone in a similar situation to me who's not, who's, if I say it bluntly, a white man, did the same thing and you didn't do anything to him.
Wow, it's definitely far more complex than what it is there on the surface. Yeah.
Exactly.
Arthur, I'll pose the next question to you. Let's see, and then we'll go to Rajiv and Janet to see if they have something. Are there any notions about moonlighting which can be termed as false or futile?
As false and futile?
Yeah.
Did you say?
Yes, false and futile.
Any moonlighting? Could the person elaborate a little bit more on what they deem as false and futile?
Yeah,
Is that
I'll
possible?
look
Sorry.
that up, and Janet, Rajiv, if you can make of anything of this question, please go ahead and answer. Um, while we get this thing, what is the impact of moonlighting on organizations and the general workforce?
And the what? I'm sorry.
And the general workforce.
Okay.
General
I
I think they're
suppose
trying to
I could
compare
answer that.
between the
Is that
the section of the audience, the employees that moonlight, and the section that does not moonlight. I think they want to compare and contrast between the impact between these two sections.
got you? So, do you mind if I take this one
Go
a
ahead.
little bit?
Please.
So, sounds good. So, I think ultimately it comes with again the community again with the community that you're delivering the value, the impact with, right? It's I'm going to bring up controversial example, which I'm sure is very popular in social media recently with Elon Musk and his
Yeah.
work on Twitter. I'm sure everyone's aware of that. So I'm not condoning anything that he's doing or not condoning because it's up to him. But what I'm trying to say is you can clearly see there is a divide within the culture of the workforce within Twitter, right? Partly that he wants everyone to sort of hardcore. So I think let's address the problem first as to I think the worry is that if there's a part of the workforce that is moonlighting, you're presuming that there's a potential reduction in productivity or in the work or in the overall output of the workforce as well. As a result, you're worried that with this sort of divide, you feel like there is a certain part of the company that's probably doing more of the heavy lifting than the other. If this happens, then that's where I think not just HR, but the entire executive team has to come in and understand is the distribution of workload or the manager who's responsible for those teams or those individuals, are they distributing the workload correctly? Are they providing enough sort of responsibility for that individual so that he and she could look after the work and be proud of something, right? That again, it's trying to understand what's the core problem, why what's leading them to sort of moonlight in the first place.
Yeah.
So as a result, that's the core problem that you need to address. If moonlighting, for example, a significant amount of people are doing their own thing, as a result, leaving to a bunch of people that are doing heavy lifting, that's not good, right? But what we're trying to say is, and I suppose, I guess, I came into this meeting with a sort of an mindedness. I guess I'm quite, now I'm trying to understand myself a little bit more, but I think I can see that it really shouldn't be the fact. You should probably look at the overall team and understand whether or not the team as a whole is functioning correctly as a whole, rather than start trying to stop one side or the other. Again, I hope this is a acceptable
Yeah.
answer for you guys. Anyone else like to chime in?
If not, I'll go ahead with the
If
next.
I were to just
Ah,
add on, if I were to just add on to what Arthur said, I'm in agreement with that. What I personally believe is every human being, right, spends time to explore their full potential, right? So and that's why if you see in the last decade or so, the number of startups have significantly increased. Earlier people were more happy doing a fixed kind of job. you know Now people are more excited, interested to join a startup, knowing well the risks that are associated with these startups. But what has transitioned according to me is, I as an individual and everyone, we want to really identify what is our calling. Why are we here, what is our purpose. you know and therefore, that's where I think the guys who are doing moonlighting, so-called moonlighting that we tell, right, I think they are exploring what their potential is and what is it that they can do better. It's a positive way of looking at this, is what I would say, instead of just criticizing. But it's something that those people are stepping forward and trying to explore, that what is their actual calling, for them.
yeah, yeah.
This is what I feel.
So, Rajiv, one question very related to what you're speaking about. Is moonlighting related or limited only to remote workforce, or do people who have to be at work also moonlight? And Any example? And I can see all the heads go, no, it's across. Would love to see
I think my
examples.
co-panelists will also agree with me on this. I don't think it is restricted to only remote working, right? Remote working probably has just highlighted the issue much more clearer to many people, but it's been happening and it's going to stay there during the day also. I'll give you simple examples, which you will be able to relate to. For example, a lot of people who are working in finance department, okay, especially when we have this tax return filing process that every individual has to do. And in US, for example, the cycle is from January to December. In India it is April to March. So everybody at the end of the year have to file the taxes, and there are some tax related benefits. Eventually you try to find some tax advisor who can advise you that these are the investments. If you do, you will be able to save some money for yourself. And 7 out of 10 times you will find that somebody from your own company in the finance department is happy to help you out as a separate business for that. And they'll give you some advisory services in the evening, and they'll say, okay, I'll charge you nominally for that, but why don't you take this policy from me? Why don't you invest in this policy? So that so this is an example where people have been doing it, is what I feel.
Thanks,
Yeah, if I
Raj.
can add something to that, I think that moonlighting, it's not limited to any one type of position, company, person. I know, for example, it's very common here. If you have somebody, let's say they work somewhere, they're in, say, housekeeping or custodial staff, and maybe they're immigrants and they have families still living in the country where, their country of origin. They want to send them money, they want to bring them over. So then they go, they have their daytime job, and maybe in the evening they are stocking shelves in a Walmart or a Target or something like that. And now I marvel at that because I wonder, like, do you sleep ever? Like, when do you sleep? How do you manage to be awake? But assuming they do that and they do their jobs and they're diligent, that's great. But it's not so to even look at it and zero in on any one place where it could happen. So definitely not just remote workers. And but I will say, because I think with the remote working, that does allude really kind of to the pandemic, because remote working, I think, did increase dramatically with the pandemic. And so sometimes we look at it and say, oh, it's because of remote work. It's because of social media. It's because of this generation. It's the millennials. It's the Gen Z workforce. You know what? No, this has always been an issue.
No.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that if you can have policies and whatever, there are certain people, if they really feel they need to moonlight, they need another job and they want to do it, then they're going to do it. And they will take the risk. And then if they and then they may come back later when they say they're going to respond to it. And as I talked about earlier decide, well, you know what? You really aren't so great yourself. And you say you're terminating me because of this, but it's really this other wrongful reason. And you get yourself into something that you probably never thought you'd be into. And again, so you ask yourself, is it worth it? And by the way, I do want to say, I think this topic was a little bit misnamed because it says the big debate, and we don't really seem to be debating. We seem to be mostly on the same page.
Agreeing.
I hope nobody feels gypped, that nobody feels like maybe they didn't get what they came here for, that we didn't really debate, but just wanted to put that out there.
Thanks, Janet. Great point. We called it the debate, but we're all seeming to be agreeing on almost all the points. Janet, I'll probably pose the next start with the next question for you, and then maybe Rajiv and Arthur can answer. There's lots of chatter around the layoffs that have happened because of moonlighting, and lots of bad press has also followed across social media. If not layoffs, what can organizations do once they realize that there's a mass moonlighting happening?
First of all, and I, at the risk of sounding like I'm repeating myself, because I kind of am, so we call that here, there's a saying, like, you sound like a broken record, which is a little bit dated. So at the risk of sounding like that broken record that's like, it's stuck in the same groove, it keeps saying the same thing. Let's say you see mass moonlighting. Does that necessarily mean it's a bad thing? Is it impacting your company in a negative way? If it's not, leave it alone. That's the first piece. If it is, how is it and where is it? It's maybe isn't negatively impacting the entire company across the board. So look at where the negative impact is and now try to address that. And then look at, again, who's moonlighting? Why? You know, how about, and this is something I say to employers all the time, talk and listen to your employees. They're going to be your best indicator if there's a problem, whether it's a problem now, whether it's brewing. If you're an executive, get out of that, from behind that desk, get out of that corner office and talk to your employees. If you're not a people person, then maybe there's somebody else that works with you that can do that for you and then report back to you. And then figure out what you want to do about it. If you really feel that the moonlighting is not a good thing for your organization, then you need to get to the root of that problem and address that. If you're just going to react with a policy and you're just going to go after people, guess what? You're still going to have this issue. If you're just going to go for the minimum reactive strategy, that can only ever be your maximum. And what happens when, you're aiming for that, whatever that minimum is, whatever it is, what you aim for, often you're going to fall short of that. And that's one reason to aim for more than just the bare minimum. So that's, I guess, a short global answer. And actually, I'll go a little more global. You're an organization, you're having a problem. It could be moonlighting, it could be anything else. So you can look at the problem. It is a problem. It should be solved. Okay, great. Problems are also opportunities to grow. If you look at them that way, if you approach them that way, if it's something where you look at it as, bad employees, smack them down. Now, again, you have to have policies, you have to have boundaries, you have to be able to defend them appropriately. I'm not saying that you shouldn't. I am not arguing there should be no boundaries. I want to make that really clear.
Yeah.
But when there's a problem, it's okay. Maybe a boundary has been breached. So what are we going to do now? What's the appropriate response? But hey, there may be something, a bigger picture issue that I need to look at. There may be an opportunity for me to rethink things here and to do things differently that could be better for everybody, for my company. And those employees, when we talk a lot about marketing and branding also, for companies. And you know what? Guess who your biggest, best brand ambassadors are or could be and should be? It's your employees.
It's your employees. Yeah, absolutely. So Janet, I think as you were saying that we are all agreeing. So there's a comment in the text chat that says, so all panelists are agreeing that moonlighting is ethical, ?
We didn't say that, did we?
Yeah.
I didn't say that I won't specifically it's ethical. No, it's not always ethical, but it's not inherently unethical. It's not inherently a bad thing for your company all the time. There are specific times when it is, and that's when you should address it appropriately. So no, let's not, that's a bit of a broad stroke, to paint that picture with.
I'll stick to your it depends comment, Janet, that, it depends on so many things. Totally.
Yes, it does. It's very nuanced.
One last question before we start to wrap up the session. What are the societal impacts of moonlighting, especially with respect to limited employee opportunities? Recall the 40-hour work week movement across various countries was to promote more people finding employment opportunities. It's a long question.
Yeah, it is.
I'll just read the first part. I think the next part is an example. Go ahead, Rajiv.
Shati, if I were to take off, on this, I think we have been saying this for quite some time now, that AI, ML, robotics, etc., will replace human workforce. But actually, if you see, nothing like that happens, right? There are certain jobs which are now transferred or replaced, but you always have something new which also gets created at the same time, right? So it's not end of the road, what I feel, that if moonlighting is doing, then that becomes end of the road. I don't see it that way, right? So, for example, they said that technology has come, and I'm referring to a game called as cricket, which is pretty much liked in India and across the globe also now. That we said that all the decisions made on the ground will be through the technology. But you still see, even though we have technology to support the decision making, the umpire still stands on the ground. And same way, if I take football, there is a DRS system, video referral system, and all that, but still you have a referee. Because at the end of the day, we should not forget what Janet said at the beginning. It's people is all about relationships, right?
Yeah,
Human
yeah.
being is all relationship that we're having, and for this relation to strive and to grow successfully, you need to have a human intervention in that whole process. So moonlighting or no, I think this is going to continue. We'll only see different shapes and forms which will come in, but I think the principle will continue.
I'll stick with your analogy of the road, Rajiv, and probably if each one of you could summarize where does this road lead us to, then we will wrap up the session. Anyone?
Sounds good. I'll go next. I think ultimately it really depends on the business. Coming from an employer's perspective, it ultimately depends. The road depends on your decision on where you want to take your product towards. Right? Moonlighting will happen regardless um, how you want to run your business or not. Because in terms of hiring, you can't really determine a person whether he or she will be moonlighting behind your back. All you could do is provide a supportive environment that you could then make sure that you and your team are doing the best way you can. And if someone's underperforming, that's where then you have to root out the problem and solve it. Otherwise, in that moonlighting, I think I've been pretty clear. It's not a negative or positive connotation. Janet's also talked about it's not unethical or ethical. It really depends on the situation that you're on the ground towards. And Rajiv talked about it exactly, like in terms of how technology comes in. You could Moonlighting could have opened up to more people moonlighting, but technology could also open up to more productivity being provided. For an example, even with project managers, right? A lot of people would require, a specific role to manage things. However, now with teams being more autonomous and across different geographical regions, you have software that could manage it, that could predict, that could give you the percentile of an event being likely to be done. As a result, that's one role gone, but another role created in terms of creating products like these. So I think it's just human nature whereby we always sort of yearn to have a relation with someone, interacting with things, and then as a result, it will just continue going onwards. And that road, I suppose, if I have to give
Thanks,
a quote,
Adarsh.
being cheesy, that road will never
Yeah.
end. That's it.
Thank you. Janet, Rajiv?
After I'll go after Janet.
People say, where's it going? So I want to put a thought out there that, I don't think anybody needs me to say that that the world, everything is changing and is changing so rapidly. And I think that we'd probably all agree that the world as it is today is not the world that any of us were born into, and maybe not even the world that our kids were born into. It's changing that quickly. So to really call, where is it going? You can't say, nobody can predict the future, really. We can sometimes, within generalities, we can make a prediction. So then the question is, for each of us, for every business owner, for every leadership team, we have to look at where would we like, in what direction would we like to be headed, and what will best suit that. And when we talk about any sort of transgression, as you look at it, also we have laws about criminal laws, because there are certain boundaries we have that we say, hey, this is a line you absolutely can't cross, and when you do, we're going to do something about that. Now, I don't know of a country, maybe I'm being overly simplistic here with this, but generally speaking, our police forces don't go out there trying to track people down because they might be committing a crime, unless we have evidence or something that's been reported to us or we've seen that indicates there may be an issue. And I think that's kind of similar here. So if we don't have an indication that there's something causing a problem, that anybody's being hurt by it, that anything is maybe contrary to our company's mission or what we're looking to do or whatever, then okay, we don't have to be trying to track people down. And we don't have to be locking the cookie jar all the time. But there should be times if somebody really does have their hand in the cookie jar and it doesn't belong there, and we see that, absolutely, we need to respond appropriately. Emphasis on the word appropriately, though.
Yeah. Thanks, Janet.
So, to summarize from my side, Shanti, we've all heard of the term called as VUCA, VUCA, right? VUCA world is what we call where there's a lot of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and things will keep on happening. Moonlighting is just one thing which is happening now. A couple of years later, there could be some new term which we'll face with. But what I personally believe is all the management, right, including the HR department, should be more proactive. And the mantra that I say is decide win-win goals. And when I say win-win goals, is win not only for the organization but win for the employee also. So finalize on win-win goals and try to put a process which is co-creative by nature, where all the policies and processes are defined by including the employees and not just thinking from a one-way direction, from what we have. So if we are able to co-create and create this whole culture, then I think this irrespective of moonlighting or anything that we come, organizations will thrive, employees will thrive, and society at large will thrive positively. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajiv, and thank you all the panelists. It has been an incredible discussion, and I'm sure the participants have enjoyed.